here today with the great Carl Grant, who has had a tremendous career that's included a significant commitment to the U.S. Army as an airborne infantry officer, multiple founder or co-founder roles, a 20-year stint as an EVP of global business development for the well-known Cooley law firm, Cooley LLP. And most recently, he's emerged as a successful author of the book, How to Live an Abundant Life. Carl, thank you so much for joining us on the Road to CEO podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure, Will. Good to be here.
Did I get that introduction right?
That's good. Yeah, as right as anybody's gotten it.
I'm sure I've left a few things out, but I think we're here to talk about your journey in business, and there are a lot of places we could start. But why don't we go back to 1995? What led you to join the Army?
Well, actually, I started it on my LinkedIn in 1995. I actually was in earlier than that. So, I cut. You get a little older, you cut off those dates. So I actually was commissioned in 1988. Believe it or not, that really ages me. So I was in ROTC in college, and my dad was in the 82nd Airborne as a enlisted infantry officer, and interestingly enough, he made it all the way to the rank of brigadier general with my help a little bit. But he never pushed me to go into the military, and so when I got into college, I started getting good grades, and I showed up on the ROTC radar, and they came to recruit me, and I saw that I could get a 3-year scholarship if I, applied. So I did, and my dad gave me good advice. He said, "Look, if you apply, it doesn't mean you have to do it. You're not obligated until you take the oath and sign on the dotted line." And so I thought long and hard about it, because getting into the military, you're putting your life on the line. You're signing up for something that you don't have control of. And so I fully understood and grasped what I was getting into, and part of it was the patriotism I was raised with, and my dad was in, my son was in. There's been a little bit of drop off here in the past few years of patriotism. Hopefully we'll get it back, because I was in when Ronald Reagan was president. Those were very patriotic times. Don't know if you were around there, but certainly you've heard about it, and everybody felt pretty good about being American. And so, I never regretted it. It was some of the greatest experiences of my life were with soldiers, some of the best people in the world who serve.
Yeah, I was 6 years old when Ronald Reagan was leaving office, but I do have some good memories of that time.
Yeah, I was high school and college during Reagan, so he was a guy who shaped that whole generation, and I think joining the military and serving your country was something that was highly thought of at that time, and so it was a good time, great time.
Did you know that you wanted to get into business at some point?
Yeah, as growing up, I really there were two things that were on my radar. Politics was something that was on my radar, and in business, and a lot of that was shaped by my dad. He pointed out that being an entrepreneur is a great way to create wealth and have autonomy, and so I tried to do that early in my career, Will. And you've got kids?
No.
No? Okay. Well, when you have kids, it changes everything, right? I was doing the startup thing, and then my wife and I started creating, the 5 children that we have now, and as in the early 2000s. So in 2000, I joined the management team of the first company to put video over the internet. Believe it or not. I mean, we raised $36 million on 1 frame per second motion JPEG.
Wow.
And yeah, and we were out ahead of YouTube and everybody, and we got it to 3 frames per second. We got it to, I think, MPEG 4. But what happened was March of 2000 happened, and March of 2000 was the nuclear winter for the tech industry, and so after that startup imploded, unfortunately. And then I joined a company called Cyber CFO, which was kind of an early fintech company. We were financial services, but we were morphing into fintech, and we raised close to $3 million. And then 9/11 happened, and that really put the kibosh on a lot of the financial activity. And our investor in our Series A round, I had already lined up a lead for the Series B. I was out raising it, and I was on the board of directors and on the management team. Our Series A investor came back and pulled out of the B round, and having raised money yourself, right? I mean, that'll put you in a tailspin. And so even though we had 2 million in revenue, we're a fairly healthy business, but we were building it off a venture model, right? A venture model is you burn money to grow, and when you're operating like that, when you can no longer burn money and you have to start cutting things, you can cut people, but real estate leases are hard to cut. I mean, there's some fixed costs. We were like $7,500 away from break even, and we just couldn't get there. And my wife, I'd never forget her saying, how about you don't do any more startups while I'm raising all these kids. And so that's why I went back to professional services. So Cooley at the time was the law firm for both of those companies that I was working for. Had already become very good friends with Mike Lincoln at Cooley, and he was the attorney on both those accounts. And so we had started. I mean, I previously worked at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I was the largest referral source for their old firm. And so he said, "Hey, doesn't look like it's going too good over there at Cyber CFO. You want to come join us at Cooley?" And I said, "Yeah, Cooley sounds pretty good right now." And little did I know I'd be there for 20 years, but I was, and I literally left on my 20th anniversary.
Wow. That might start to answer another question I had for you. At one point, I remember some years back, you described yourself as a frustrated entrepreneur. Do you
Yeah.
remember that?
I know. I totally do. Yeah. Um, I think all entrepreneurs are frustrated, right? Even when you're doing a startup, I'm still a frustrated entrepreneur because you always need more money, more revenue, more employees. I mean, it's a frustrating experience, right? But being in the professional services industry, I had to switch gears, and no longer were these my startups. These were my friends' startups, right? Right. So I got to live vicariously through guys like you, and helping companies connect with sources of capital, connect with potential customers and partners, connect with potential, C-suite hires, and so I built a bunch of startups, not as a startup founder or co-founder or management team member, but as a trusted advisor. And so I got to, it wasn't as financially lucrative. Don't get me wrong. Cooley paid me very well. I lived a good life all those years, but there were no, equity pops. There was, a nice salary and a year-end bonus. But I got a great amount of joy through watching my friends become successful. Not all of them were successful, but the ones that were, and they had liquidity events, and I, I mean, it was gratifying to have a guy's wife come up to you at a party and say thank you so much for helping my husband, and and it's and talk about all the blessings to their family that resulted from what I had done, and that's pretty cool, right? I mean, I not all of life is about making money. I mean, I write about that in the book behind me. It's not about enriching yourself financially. You can enrich yourself through relationships, and when you can help somebody else succeed, there's a certain amount of feeling good that comes along with that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's really well said. I want to go back to your Army experience for a moment. I've talked to a couple CEOs who have spent time in the military, and I was curious, do you feel like it was a positive for your growth as a business leader?
Absolutely. So some key lessons that you get from the military. One, you get like a organizational structure and chain of command, and a lot of that doesn't exist in the startup world. People just don't understand what it's like to have an organization under you. And in the Army, at the age of 21, 22, you're a newly minted second lieutenant, and you've got guys who are twice your age saluting you and calling you sir. That's a pretty daunting experience because you're not worthy of it at all. And so you have to rise to the occasion, and you have to figure out how to take these 40-something-year-old guys and co-opt them to become your leaders, right? To follow your vision. And I learned early on that the Army or any military establishment does not move without the non-commissioned officer. So you figure out how to get these guys who technically report to you, but if you don't have their hearts and minds, they're not going to do what you want. In fact, they'll undermine you, right? Because they have a lot of power. And so I I saw that really vividly when I was pulling security duty in the middle of the night. I was a security officer at the national matches. That's a rifle match. And you got hundreds of people around with high powered rifles and stuff. It's a there's a lot of things that could go wrong. And I actually had what looked like, I don't know exactly what was going on. It looked like it could have been a race related riot of sorts in the barracks. And the guy who was doing duty with me wouldn't even go in. He's like, I'm not going in there, sir. So I went in there by myself, a second lieutenant, and I had all these people that were in the midst of like a riot, and I had to exert my military bearing. And I one of the guys said something. He talked back to me after I got everybody to calm down. He talked back to me, and I was thinking, other than this gold bar on my hat, there's not much I could do. Like when you got
Yeah.
20, 30 guys, that are in a riotous situation. Well, right at that time, this grizzly looking E8, bald head, looked like Mr. Clean, walked up behind me and he goes, I got this, sir. And he walked in there and everybody was down in the front leading rest position, which is push-up position for military speak. And I mean, they were scared to death of this guy, right? I was scared of him. I'm like, thank you. Because I don't know what the heck I would have done had that guy not shown up and saved my rear end. So you learn those lessons. And so when you go into a tech company, well, somebody may technically not be your superior. You learn how to co-opt people who can help you perform better. They might not even be in your organizational structure, Will. And so I've learned the art of how to do that. And then the other thing it teaches you, this is another very key thing that you just don't get if you don't have an experience like this, is servant leadership. All right. So when you're an officer in the military, and it's time, for example, this is one kind of illustration. When it's time to eat, right? There's a limited amount of food that you have for the unit. And so as the officer, you could, but you don't eat first, right? You let all of your soldiers and underlings eat before you. And guess what? If there's no food left, you don't eat. That's the way it works. And so, and it teaches you to take that approach to all manner of leadership, right? If you've got a soldier with a problem, he's, I don't know, can't pay his bills, or he's, got stuck in jail over the weekend, or whatever. I mean, soldiers have problems, right? Like they do things, they do crazy stuff. But if you're not there to make sure that they're bailed out, or they can, their needs are met, they're going to be distracted and not doing what they need to do. And so if they know that you have their back, they've got your back and they'll follow you anywhere. And so I learned that by practicing it, but also observing it. I also had commanders who I would follow to the ends of the earth because I knew they had my back. And I'm not going to go through a lot of illustrations, but they go above and beyond. Like, for example, you're trying to get back to a closing formation for drill, and you get a speeding ticket. I've had commanders make those things right, without saying how they did it, because they probably shouldn't have done it that way, but they made sure that speeding ticket was covered because they knew I was trying to get back for duty. And you know what? When somebody does that for you, it makes you want to follow them if they want to go to Iraq or wherever the heck they want to go. You know that they got your back.
Yeah. I think that's great. I'm really glad you went into such detail, because I think that might encourage people who are thinking about business to consider starting off with a leadership role in the military. I think there are opportunities there that you can't find anywhere else.
I do too. I mean, you're under so much pressure, right? When you're planning a live fire exercise, I mean, it's an exercise. I mean, there's live fire in combat too, right? That's pressure. The risks are the stakes are high. And so making a wrong decision, there's very big costs. And so you learn how to really sharpen your decision-making abilities. And how to take into consideration the advice you're getting around you and so forth. And so all of that can be applied in business.
So you've talked a little bit about how you transitioned from the military into the world of startups, and how after, I think, Cyber CFO, you decided to move into Cooley. And so how was Cooley set up from a business development standpoint? I think you led the team for, 20 years or so, or actually exactly 20 years. And how was that set up? You had a team of people that you were working with to drive new business leads or expand existing business. What was that like?
Well, interestingly, that when I took the role at PricewaterhouseCoopers prior to that, I was the first business development hire there. And literally the guy who hired me said, because this hadn't been done before, he said, Carl, this is like I'm leading you into a dark room. I'm not giving you a flashlight and I'm not showing you the way out. You got to figure this out. And that sounded exciting to me, right? And so I did it and I figured out that nobody wants to buy a freaking audit. Like you may need an audit, but you don't want to buy one. But you are interested in the other clients those auditors work with because those are venture funds and big companies that could become customers of yours. So I figured out early on that it was all about connecting the dots. And so when I did a couple startups, and then I joined Cooley. When I got to Cooley, they did not have a business development role. It did not exist in the law firm world. So I was the first once again. And so when I showed up, they stuck me in a marketing role. And in that marketing role, I had to do like pitch materials and budgets and event management. I was doing all this stuff, and all they really wanted me to do was be out in the marketplace selling. So after a year of me, doing that and kind of being spread too thin, they finally just pulled me out of that marketing manager role and just said, "You're just pure business development." They gave the managerial role to somebody else, and I was set free. And I thrived. So it was a year. So I wasn't running the group the entire 20 years. I was just a sole you know, like producer. And I produced a lot. And so after doing that for a year, then they gave me more responsibility to cover the East Coast. And so I had team members that reported into me. And then after that, they got rid of the old chief marketing officer, basically took the business development oriented marketing people, put them under me, and I became head of the BD group. And I did that for the rest of the time that I was there. So we had 17 people in the team. Most of those people were either geographic or industry focused people, in market facing. I had a couple of administrative people, but I turned them into revenue producers too. And I got a head of operations. I don't know if it was a operations manager or director, but anyways, I turned them into revenue producers. I turned the whole organization, even administrative people, into revenue producers.
Fascinating. So this strikes me as a really good model for service provider companies. Is this something that you've seen at other law firms, other accounting firms, things like that at this point?
Every accounting firm has it now. So yeah, PricewaterhouseCoopers, while I didn't create the function, I helped define the function. And then quickly thereafter, I saw, E&Y and Deloitte and all of the other firms do it. Even investment banks have it, private equity funds have it, law firms have it, but most law firms don't have external facing business development roles. A lot of the bigger law firms are kind of old school where they think that the partner should be out in the market doing that. And then they hire business development people, but the business development people are more internal facilitators. And so I'm doing consulting work for a few other law firms right now. I've got a handful of other law firms. I don't know, I should rattle them all off on here but anyways, I mean, so one of the law firms I'm consulting with, they did not have an external facing business development role. So I'm kind of like a foreign, foreign matter coming into the firm, but I'm trying to like ease my way in and make sure I don't ruffle feathers, and it seems to be going well. So the first phase of my engagement there was writing a plan to execute and training their associates who will become partners on how to do these things, right? And then I got hired back to come and help implement the plan. It's not full time; it's just a part-time gig, and now we're looking at expanding that as we go into this new year. So and I'm having fun doing it. It's kind of like a startup. You know, it's a consulting client of mine. I've got a couple of companies, and then I've got my consulting business. And in that consulting business, I have a handful of mainly law firms that I work with. I've done an investment bank, and I'm talking to an accounting firm about doing some training for them. I really enjoy the business development training. It's a lot of fun.
Very cool. Okay, so I wanna probably pick up around that time here. So you spent your time with Cooley, and was it at the end of Cooley that you relocated down to Austin, or was it before then?
Well, I relocated to Austin while I was with Cooley,
Okay.
and the plan at Cooley at the time was to open an Austin office. What happened in the process of doing that? It was a not so secret initiative. So I could probably talk about it now because I don't think it's happening right now. It may happen in the future, but Chicago distracted our efforts because they had a group of partners that all were coming together, and so the Austin effort got distracted by Chicago, and we opened up a fantastic Chicago office, but we kind of took the eye off the ball in Austin, and all of the lateral recruits we were targeting all went to other firms, unfortunately. And so one of those other firms and one of those potential lateral recruits recruited me to come and do some work for that other firm. And so that's what happened. And as that happened, it was time to move on. I was kind of on an island out here,
Mhm.
and so it was a good time to part ways.
Okay, so I'm hearing from people who've moved to Austin and they love it, and I'm also hearing about some people who are leaving Austin currently. So now for years I've just heard nothing but great things about Austin, and now I'm starting to hear two sides. Where are you? How are you enjoying Austin? Is it a great move? Do you like the area?
I love Austin. Yeah, Austin's fantastic. We were looking. My wife and I were looking at a warmer climate. That's really what we were looking for, and Florida was too humid for her. She was born in Florida, and Austin was a good, uh, it was a good middle ground. It's not as humid here. The middle of the state, it's got very mild temperatures. The winters are pretty mild. This weekend it'll be in the 60s here, which last weekend it got up to 72. I actually went and got some sun at the pool. So,
Yeah,
how
we're
many
in
people
the
do that?
30s. Yes,
Huh?
back on the East Coast here, we're in the 30s.
Yeah, so I mean, it's consistently. I watched like I've been going to South by Southwest for a decade, and I watched the temperatures, between the two markets, and it's consistently about 20 degrees warmer, and that's a life-changing difference. And so the weather was a big part of it. You know, I moved to the DC area because my parents were there, and then once you have 5 kids, it's really hard to move. You're outnumbered, and so it wasn't until we got down to 2 kids, and one is just turned 25 today, so technically she could be out on her own if she wanted to be, and the other one's in college. So we're almost empty nesters. I don't think with 5 kids you're ever an empty nester, but so we were able to move. We had a big 6-bedroom house on 20 acres with a horse farm. We live in a 4-bedroom condo on Lake Travis now, and so we weren't planning a downsize, but we happened upon it. Literally, we were on a boat on Lake Travis and we happened upon these condos, and our condo is associated with a resort here. So I actually live at a freaking resort, if you believe that. Or it's it's pretty nice. I just walk across the street and there's restaurants and bars and pools and hot tub and a spa and gym. It's sweet.
That sounds so different from being on a horse farm. I imagine a horse farm would be a lot of work.
Yeah, it is. When I was walking back from the gym this morning, I thank God that there were men coming to do the landscape business, the landscape work there, because 20 acres is a lot of work, and yeah, it's nice not to have to do that anymore.
Sure. So okay, so then you moved to Austin, you decided to break off on your own. So why don't you just so where do you stand today? What are you involved with currently? What's your major initiatives at the moment? It seems like you've got a lot going on.
I do. So being with a big company for all those years, your hands are really tied in terms of doing much in the entrepreneurial front. I was on few advisory boards, but that was about all I could do, you know. And now that I'm on my own, I don't have any restrictions, and so I'm kind of making up for 20 years of lost time, and so I'm probably doing too much. But I, if you partner with the right people, you can accomplish a lot. And so I'm chairman of the board of a life sciences company that is developing cures for previously thought incurable diseases. I'll leave it at that. We've got a patented formulation out, and we're going through some clinical trials right now, and I expect big things out of that company. So it's not a full-time thing. We've got a full-time CEO. And then I've got my consulting business where I've got a handful of clients. That's really what pays me. And so I have fun doing that. My son and I launched a company called Capital Raise. So we built a LinkedIn-like platform that has all of my investor contacts that I made over the 25 years I was doing business development, and it has a matching algorithm. And so, as somebody who's been an entrepreneur, raising money is a black box, right? Like who's going to invest in this company? What are you going to do? You're going to get on Google? Like, how are you gonna find these people? If you get on LinkedIn, you can see who knows who, but you don't know who invests in what. And so a lot of it is really misguided and shot in the dark. And then you have to lean on service providers to make those referrals for you. And I know, having been a service provider, you're not going to get hundreds of referrals. You're going to get a dozen, and because you got other work to do. And so I took all those investor contacts, paid folks around the world. Actually, I had people in a number of countries, like researching the investment criteria, building out the database. And I had a software development company back in DC called Mass Light do the software development. I designed the platform. They built it. We split the equity in the company, and so it's a pretty slick platform. You build a profile, you put certain information in the fields, and it'll pull out where the company's located, what industry it's in, what your revenue is, how much you're raising, who your customer base is, B2B, B2C, B2G, and whether or not you're a female or minority entrepreneur. Some funds care about that. So with all that data, it'll take all those fields, and it'll query it against the investor database. It's got well over 5,000 investors in there, and it'll show us on a percentage basis, which are the strongest match. And we even have our own private coding to like grade the relationships, like how well these people are and what the likelihood of response is, because some of these guys, even if they're your buddy, some of them just don't respond, right? And so so we have our own internal system for doing that, and we're able to take companies that are raising money, and these are not pre-revenue companies. We don't. If you're a life sciences company, yes, pre-revenue, but you got to have good clinical data. For a software company, really $1 million in annually recurring revenue is where you're going to be most effective. That and higher. So we find that the more revenue you have, the more traction you have, the more receptive investors are to companies nowadays. So we're not looking for, I'll talk to pure startups, but we're not putting them on our platform. You can build a profile on our platform for free, and you can use that profile to send to investors, but we're not opening up our network because we get zero response for pre-revenue companies. And so I literally had an entrepreneur yesterday, somebody who I know from the market in the DC area, who's an accomplished entrepreneur. She came to me with the capital raise. I said, I really like you and I appreciate your experience, but you got to convert those pilots to revenue. Even if she had 500K in revenue, I mean, it's better than zero. And so unfortunately we had to pass. So hate turning away business, but it's the right thing to do if you can't be effective for them.
Yeah, I mean, and tell me if you disagree, but I think for a pre-revenue startup, it's really you need the relationship there. You need somebody opening doors rather. I mean, it's probably too much of a stretch to have to make a connection through a platform in general. Is
It's
that
not through the platform. It's a warm referral. So
okay?
you're not, this is, so that's why I built this platform, is because I was looking for a solution. I actually started this when I was at Cooley, because during COVID, I had so many entrepreneurs coming to me looking for help raising capital because they couldn't get out to go to business conferences. And so they needed to
Wow.
lean on guys like me. And so literally I went from like one or two a week to like hundreds, and I needed a solution to scale. And so that's when I started looking for a solution to a problem that I had, and it didn't exist. All the platforms out there had used AI tools to send referrals, or they were just cold, sent from a machine. And VCs don't respond to those. They take deals from people they know and trust. And sometimes it has to be even more than an email. Sometimes I can pick up the phone and say, "Hey, I sent you this deal. You need to look at this. Like, this is going to get done and you're going to miss it." And so, and you can't hype all of them like that, but that's how the relationship game works. So as a pre-revenue startup, the first thing you really need to do is you need to think about whose problem are you solving, and who would pay to have that problem solved. And that's the best way to go about getting that early money, is you get somebody to prepay you to solve their problem. You customize a solution for them and cut them a sweetheart deal to do that, because they're paying for your product development. You want to retain the rights to sell that product again and again. But that's the best, because it's non-dilutive capital and it gives you revenue. And so if you can get, so the other thing entrepreneurs need to know is having one customer is also the kiss of death, right? I had a company that I was consulting with early on that had 12 million in revenue, and everybody and their brother wanted to meet with this company until they saw that 12 million was from one customer. And then everybody went cold, and they said, you got to diversify your customer base. And so I think the magic number is really three, right? Two, you got lucky. Three, you got a business, right? And so having revenue and having not concentrated revenue is what you need to do as a startup. If you cannot get to that revenue without taking some money, customer money is best. Like what I did was I divided equity with a development team, because I'm not a developer, and I wanted those guys in as partners. So I didn't, say, "Oh, you get 20%, I get the rest." I said, "I want you to be an equal partner with me, because I know that I'm going to need to pivot this thing, and I know that I'm going to come back to you, and I'm going to need more features." And like, yeah, we did a full renaming of the platform. We did a redevelopment of the user interface. I mean, I knew that was coming. I didn't know what it was going to look like, but I've been around enough entrepreneurs in my life that I knew that was part of the game. And so their partners, they're in. In fact, they even put $100,000 in the company, so they're in more than me. And so, those are things you can do as an entrepreneur, and I know where those resources are. Interestingly enough, where we also, because so many of our capital raise clients also are building software, we also stood up a software development company. So I, yeah, I mean, it was just an opportunistic thing where I have this network of all these international software developers, and so we cobbled that together, and we have developers in Pakistan, India, in Eastern Europe, and South America. And so we call it Pool Bar Software Solutions. And so that's an opportunistic company that when we come across somebody that has software development needs, rather than just saying, "Here, call my buddy," we say, "We can handle that for you through this company that we've set up." And these are people that we know. We've vetted them, and we've got pre-negotiated prices with them. We've got contracts in place, and so it's streamlined. So that's, yeah. I'm an entrepreneur now, so you just do these things, right?
Very cool. So that's two. So you've got two startups going on.
Yeah, and then I've got another one with a partner that I was actually on the team meeting this morning. We've got a handful of people, 6 or 7 people in Karachi, Pakistan. It's called Connector LLC. It doesn't take a lot of my time. I literally, as I'm getting ready in the morning, their time, it's 8:30 a.m. my time, and whatever it is over there, I think they're almost like 11 or 12 hours difference, and so it's evening over there. And so the team gets on. I pretty much listen in, because we've got somebody very capable who runs that team, and so what we're doing is we're putting business development professionals at conferences internationally. So as an entrepreneur, you may want to have a presence in Beijing. So these are actually places where we've had these connectors. We've had them as close by as Austin, as far away as Shanghai and Saudi Arabia, Dubai. So we've placed connectors at conferences. And so what we've started doing is signing up actual conferences. So like STEP. I think they have conferences in this year's is in Dubai, but they also do Saudi Arabia. So we work with STEP, it's a huge conference, to sell through their conference platform. Like if somebody signs up to go to STEP, but they can't place a team there because it's expensive to send all those people there. It's hard to go anywhere without spending $10,000, right? We could do it under $1,000 for a connector, right? And so it's like a 10x savings. Or if you're a CEO of a company and you want to go somewhere, but you got to do some high level meetings and you want to augment your presence at that conference, and so you want some people working your booth while you're off meeting with other CEOs, we can do that. And they're trained, they're vetted, and they will bring you the leads or whatever it is you want from them, they'll do.
Very cool. It sounds like all three of those ventures are things that are really aligned with your business experience and challenges you've had just in general, being a super connector, being raising capital, all of this seems to draw or at least be very core to some of the issues you've dealt with in your career.
Yeah, and they are. And now that I'm out, on my own, I'm not doing all this stuff myself. My son, who has the same name as me, he's doing the capital raise platform with me, and he's got a number of contractors he can pull in as he needs. We've got an international network of contractors. So that's it's in capable hands. He's kind of running that. I oversee it. Super connector, I do it with a partner, but we've got a team in place. They're running it, they're doing it. We jump in on the calls when we can, and I don't even say anything on the calls because they're so focused on what they need to do. Like I'll approve the business plan for the year. I'll give some input on incentive structures for the team, but other than that, it's not like I'm working, 8 hours, 10 hours a day doing it. I spend maybe, half hour to an hour a day while I'm, getting dressed in the morning. So it's fine. And or driving, to one of my client engagements. So that doesn't take a lot of time. The software development business, that is a virtual business. I've got a team that we've assembled, but they're all contractors. It's easy to do these things when you have the right structures in place and good people.
Yeah, very cool. So then, and so with all the people that are helping out, is that what's giving you the time to find time to write a book here at this stage?
No, I had to make time to write that book. That book I started, it's been a 3-year journey. So I was actually still at Cooley, when I started doing that. It was, on vacation, on weekends. I was writing that thing for a while, and then it was like sitting on my computer. And so I was like, gosh, this thing isn't doing any good sitting on my computer. So I published some articles on LinkedIn that got some looks. And then I realized if I'm ever going to turn this into a book, I need help. Like, I had like 8 or 9 essays that I wrote, and I needed somebody to help me pull it together. So I engaged a group called Leaders Press that they have a team that's done this many times before. They've got writers to help you take what you've written and what's in your head and to bring it out. And so it's a pretty cool process. So they in addition to the stuff I had already written, they would give me they helped me come up with an outline. They help develop questions around that outline to ask me questions. And so I answered those questions in writing and in recorded interviews. And so they would take a combination of what I wrote, my answers to my questions, and what I said, and they would bring that all together and make it into something that made sense. Ultimately, I had the last say on everything. By the time we were in the end, it was just myself doing the edits at the end. But it kind of takes a village to do a book, right? I after 2 years of working on this, when I thought it was done, my oldest daughter, she's 27 years old, Her name's Teresa. She goes by Twee. She got a hold of my book on vacation one summer, and she said, "Dad, I read a lot of self-help books. I feel like I'm called to help you do this. So let me help you." And so she read the book, and she I'll never forget. She goes, "Dad, you got to be willing to kill your baby." And I'm like, I can't kill my baby. I said, you want to help me kill it, fine, but I'm not. I'm too close to this. And so she like whacked a third of the book. I
Wow.
said, you got to cut all this out because it's too business oriented and like, and it's written for an extrovert, and I'm an introvert, and I can't relate. And so I whacked a third of the book, and then I had to rewrite a bunch of that. And yeah, it was an interesting process. So it extended that process by a year, but it's a lot better now
Wow.
since she got involved. And I think it's getting better reviews. I've had all so far, knock wood, all 5-star reviews, at least on Amazon. I haven't seen what I've got on Barnes and Noble yet. And had I not made those changes, I don't think I would. I probably had some 1 and 2 stars in there.
I think it
Yeah.
was Stephen King that said, "You're not a writer until you can kill your favorite character."
Yeah. Well, there weren't really characters in the book other than me. I don't want to
Yeah,
I'd
don't
kill
do
myself.
that.
Next book, I think it'd be easier to interview other people and like have other characters in the book, because it's a lot of work just pulling it all out of your head. But I guess for a first book, it makes sense, right? It all came out of my head, and I also incorporated some. I take that back. I did do a podcast a year in advance of doing the book, and the idea was to develop content for the book. And what happened was the book was originally going to be on business development, but I realized as I got closer, this is so much of a niche audience. Like, how many BD people are out there, right? Everybody, everybody wants self-help and lifestyle, right? And so the podcast interviews were around business development best practices. So some of those things were applicable because what I did was I took practices that I used to grow revenue and business development that worked. It was human relationships is what it was all about, right? And so those same things that you do to manage human relationships in a professional services environment, by the way, they also work at home. When you're managing a family, you got a spouse and kids, you got friends in a community, you're involved in nonprofit organizations, you know, those same principles apply. And so what I did was I took what I was writing for business and I expanded it to cover other aspects of life.
So it sounds like the experience of writing a book, it was long, but it was good enough that you're considering doing more books.
We'll see. Let's see how this one does. I mean, yeah, possibly. We're like not even a month into having this one in the marketplace. I mean, it was launched December 12th. Unfortunately, I was in Saudi Arabia when it launched, so I wasn't as hands-on as I could have been here. But you know, it's at least it was out before Christmas, and some people bought it for Christmas. So
I have a couple other questions I wanted to ask. I'm trying to remember to always ask people like you about AI. What are you personally using AI for at this moment, if anything?
well, so AI, I'm glad it didn't like Chat GPT at least didn't exist when I was writing my book because it would be tempting to go and crowdsource information.
I'm
It,
pretty
it
sure
actually,
an uptick in books over the next few years is my guess.
yeah, I've got a dyslexic friend who's using Chat GPT to write his book because he can't write it himself, and so I get that. But so I was finishing my book, putting the final touches on it when Chat GPT came out, and there was one chapter in one section where I did go to Chat GPT to see what it would say, and it was pretty spot on in terms of what I had already written. And so it's good at telling you what you might be forgetting, right? And so I did borrow some memory joggers there, but I didn't let it write my book. But when I've done speeches. I've done a couple speeches recently, and when you're talking about complex topics such as cultural similarities and differences between the East and West,
Mm.
that was expanded to cover religious similarities and differences. I mean, you want to make sure you're not
Yeah.
creating like a cultural faux pas and saying something wrong. And so going to Chat GPT and asking questions, and it's pretty good on culture and religion and non-political topics, you might say, religion can be political, but ChatGPT does a pretty good job. I mean, like you ask it what what do Muslims believe about X, or what does the Hindu faith say, or you just stuff that you don't know, right? ChatGPT can give you a pretty good synopsis of what that is, and so rather than having to go read massive text, but I've read the Quran, so I know what the Quran says, but it's a big book, right? I don't remember everything that's in it, so going back and asking what Old and New Testament prophets does Islam recognize, right? For example, that's an example, right? And ChatGPT goes out to the world and pulls that in. So preparing to do a heavy topic like that, yeah, ChatGPT is great. Or I hate to say it, being that I consult for law firms, ChatGPT can put together a mean legal document.
Yeah.
Just I wanted to give my son some of my equity in my business to incentivize him. I couldn't get my co-founder degree to give him too much. So I just gave him some of mine. And I wanted to develop a vesting schedule, which that's an unusual thing to do. Like to have a stock transfer. And it's like, I'm not going to transfer a bunch of stock, even to my son, unless he's going to be here for a while, right? If he's going to like leave in 6 months and I give him whatever I gave him, 4 or 5%, like, and he leaves, then that's pointless, right? And so I had to set up a vesting schedule, and ChatGPT surprisingly came up with it, and other little contracts. I mean, if I was doing some big thing, yeah, hire a law firm for like some bet the company thing, but for little stuff, ChatGPT is pretty good.
Yeah. I've had the same experience. I'm using it for when I do a training for a client, then I will often now use ChatGPT to quickly draft me an outline, and then I'll fill in the blanks. I'll kind of build the training, but because I like it to be in my voice and all of that. But I found it to be a tremendous time saver with outlines and curriculums and stuff like that.
Position descriptions. Like
Position
I need
description,
a I
absolutely.
need a position description for a chief revenue officer. Boom, spot on. I didn't change a word. But you have to know, I mean, don't substitute Chat GPT or any AI for what, your God-given knowledge, because, like I've been around for a while. I've been out in the market for a long time, so I've got a pretty good knowledge base. So when I was going to develop a business development plan for that law firm I mentioned for a geography, I went to Chat GPT, and interestingly, since law firm business development is relatively new, it gave me a lot of marketing
Mhm.
stuff, right? And so when I looked at it, I'm like, yeah, okay, but you're missing this, and this. I actually know more than the Chat GPT large language model about law firm business development, because I've been in it longer than anybody I know.
Yeah. Yeah, I've found ChatGPT to be factually incorrect in a few areas, like in politics. It'll sometimes get the Democrat versus the Republican wrong in very obvious and key ways. And I think that's an indication, that type of thing is an indication that, I mean, it's going to be a couple years probably before those types of errors, I would imagine, are going to become less and less frequent. I'm sure that'll change adoption. I remember reading that there's certain types of technology that have to be perfect before they can truly be adopted and trusted. Other technologies don't have to be perfect. They can be 80% of the way done and then get huge mainstream adoption. AI is interesting. Like I think some areas of it only need 80%, and then it's super like if there's a good curriculum that I can draft that I can have produced about for a HubSpot training or a Google Analytics training or an advertising training, then wonderful. I fill in the rest of it. I correct any mistakes. But things in medicine and who knows all these other areas, I think AI could totally transform those industries. But it's probably going to be a couple years, I would imagine, because they need to work out certain kinks. So it's an interesting probably technological revolution, that we're seeing unfold.
I think that some of the bigger issues with AI are like the deep fakes that we're going to see. I mean, you could have videos of people saying stuff that they didn't say, doing stuff that they didn't do, so my my approach now that I've actually been burned a few times by AI, you hear somebody say something that they didn't say and you think they said it, and then you realize that wasn't them saying it. That was a computer rendition of them saying it. And so fool me once, all right, that was a lesson. But after that, you better have your spidey sense on, because you don't know, like even with like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, like there's propaganda on both sides of that issue. And so you see these horrific images and you're like, all right, is that real? Like, did that really happen, or is that like an AI generated, propaganda? And both sides are guilty of it. And so I tend to not believe stuff I see now. I am very skeptical. If even when I hear stuff in the news, I'm like, all right, is that really happening? Like, can you really trust the news anymore? And so, you know, social media, where you've actually know people who are in certain areas, um, I think, being able to send a direct message to somebody and say, hey, are bombs falling near you? Like, like, I saw you post that picture. Did you take it? Or was that one that you put up that somebody else posted, right? That's where we are now in terms of validating whether or not something's real. You've got to almost go to the source and have feet on this, feet on the street. I don't know if you follow in this whole like Miami thing that happened like 3 days ago. All right.
I'm not
So
sure. Yeah.
maybe not 3 days ago when this airs, but there was this huge police presence in Miami, assuming it's real, right? Like 60 cop cars show up. And so there's stuff going around on social media that there were like 8 to 10 foot like beings there. And so I'm looking at this and I'm like, okay, if all those police cars showed up, it's not just for some kids like having a fight or shooting off fireworks, right? Like something was going down. What was it? And then you start getting these crazy things out there, And so I'm not going to do a deep dive into the conspiracy stuff on that, but I'd like to talk to somebody in Miami who was there and say, hey, were all those cop cars there? What was going down? Like, was it fireworks? Was it a fight? Or were there like 8 to 10 foot tall creatures walking around? Like what went down? Like you see these. It's kind of like Bigfoot when I was a kid. Like you see these fuzzy pictures. Like, okay, all right, like what actually happened. So that's kind of where we are, Will.
I agree. I agree. It's fascinating, and it's interesting also because so many things about the internet and about technology make things more efficient and in our lives and business. And now we see this turning backwards a little bit because you're right. Now we've got to verify things, and there's some things that can't be verified. I mean, many times we're not going to know people who are directly involved or directly in the vicinity of a news event that we want to know about. And and so that creates an issue for believability right there. But even if we do know people around, it's certainly not the most efficient. And so we're in a very strange place with where technology has taken us.
Absolutely, whole new world.
So,
Whole
so
new world.
I've got one more question here. So you mentioned politics. So that politics was an early interest of yours. Did you think about, have you left the military, whether you were going to go into business or go into politics, or did you just have an interest in politics that you thought you might develop at some point?
I had an interest in politics, and I tell you, after the 2016 election, which is probably the nastiest campaign I've ever watched, I really kind of checked those ambitions. I'm like, yeah, I'm too nice of a guy.
Yeah.
Like, I found a lot of it very entertaining, especially the Republican primary. That was funny beyond, like, it was better than going to see a stand-up, comedy. Uh, but but do I want to be part of that? No, no. I mean, like, I could watch that as entertainment, but it's not the politics I grew up with. And and so, I've kind of checked those ambitions. Will, uh, could I ever, get back to that? Maybe if the political landscape changed, if we approach things a little differently. I don't want to be in a contest where I'm belittling somebody because of how they look, or that's really not, that's not what it's about for me. If there's a chance to do good in the world, and have a positive impact and not demonize the other side. I mean, I'm all about finding common ground. Like in my book, going back to the book, in my book, I talk about a situation where back when I was politically involved, if I could tell this story, well, I know we've been at this for a while. I was working the polls for one of the political parties. Won't say which, but there was a gentleman working the polls for the other political party. And so we're standing out literature, the people as they're walking in. It's a while back. And I just met him there, but he knew my family. I think he had met my wife and knew of my kids, lived down the street from me. And he had a sheep farm. I had a horse farm, and he had a vineyard. And we became friends there at the poll. You don't see that now. I mean, you can see people fighting and we actually became friends. And he hired, and I wrote this whole story in my book. He hired my son. He actually said, "Does your son want to come work at my farm?" And I said, "I think he may. Let me check." He was 12 years old, and so I he did. He wanted to do that, and he actually worked there from age 12 to 18. And the gentleman's name was Malcolm Baldwin. I can say it. He's passed away. But I remember him coming to me. He's a real gentleman. He goes, "Carl, do you mind if I try to indoctrinate your son?" I'm like, "Malcolm, I've had 12 years of indoctrination. Take your best shot." And so then I went and told my son. I said, "Look, Malcolm's a smart guy. And I might not agree with his politics, but he's a brilliant environmental attorney. He worked under Reagan, and then he had a falling out there, and had a different point of view, and he's very much an evolutionist, where I'm not anymore. I had a change at the age of 24, and so I remember he came back to me and he said, "Carl, do you mind if I teach your son about what was Darwin's book, the Origin of Species?" Yeah. I said, "No. In fact, I'll buy him the book." And so I bought my son the book. I said, "You better understand why you believe what you believe, because he knows why he believes what he believes. This is going to be interesting." And I said, and I also told my son, I said, "You are never going to be effective at arguing your point of view unless you can argue the other person's point of view equally as well." And so I gave him that challenge, and the two of them had these wonderful conversations. I mean, and he loved it. I mean, I think it kept him alive all those years, just talking to my son. And my son, to his credit, he would go back and he would research and go back and talk to him, and he didn't change his views. He understood what he believed, but he understood more deeply what he believed. And so the two of them had this wonderful relationship. And then when my son made Eagle Scout at the age of 18, Malcolm was the keynote speaker at his Eagle Scout thing. And we started out meeting representing different political parties. That's the type of guy I am. I don't want to be in a political situation where he's the enemy, and I have to demonize him and turn him into some non-human, to score political points. No, I mean, I've sat down with people, friends of mine, on the opposite end of the political spectrum in San Francisco, and we're looking at the homeless problem, and we're talking about, why did they look at these people? These people need help. They shouldn't be on the streets. Some of these people are not equipped to be on the streets. I said, when I was in college, and this predates you a little bit because you were just a kid, they closed down the mental institutions. I'm sure the mental institutions had problems, but that was a better place than defecating on the streets and smoking crack and shooting up on the streets was what you see in San Francisco. And the two of us agreed. We agreed on that. It's okay, why can't two rational, intelligent people get together, different political views, and come up with a solution to this? Why do these people have to be pawns? You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
it makes no sense to me. And it's like that with everything, like green energy versus oil. I mean, come on. I mean, there's a place for green energy, but there's a place for oil. Can't we be rational about these things? And there's a meeting in the middle that people just don't do. There's a compromise. Even back like when Reagan was president, Tip O'Neill was Speaker of the House. And it was legendary because these guys, yeah, it was politics during the day, but they would like go and I don't know if they would have drinks but they would break bread at night. I mean, they were actually friends with each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
I miss those days. Those are the days when I wanted to be into politics, where you could have an opponent, but your opponent's another human being, and you could work out, deals with these people and not just be gridlock. I'd like to see politics change, and maybe the two-party system needs to be blown up. I don't know. I don't really identify with either political party, Will. That's another challenge that I have I'm not a Democrat, but I'm not a Republican. I mean, like I'm not either of those, and they're both corrupt. And so yeah, I mean, to get elected nowadays, you got to fit yourself into one of those political parties. But like, look at RFK Jr. Like, here's a guy who's kind of a unique guy, right? And there's a lot of, I mean, he was running it as a Democrat, but I know a lot of like Republicans or conservatives that like the stuff he was saying, and now he's an independent. So I don't know what happens with this campaign, but I think we need more voices like that don't really fit the mold, right? Because you can't pigeonhole me into either of these things.
Yeah.
So
I feel the same way. I mean, I think we, I think we could use more people with the attitude that you're describing, in politics that are not just, bomb throwers. I don't know if you know this, but I started off my career in politics. I was press secretary for Congressman Frank Wolf, who probably represented you for a long time.
yeah, I know. I went to this is a small world. I went to elementary school with his daughter, Virginia.
Okay.
Yeah, we were kids in first grade together. So like we were in first grade together. We were in sixth grade together, and then when we were like raising kids, we went to the same church, and it was funny. So Frank Wolf, sorry, I remember running into Frank Wolf, and I told him I was moving out of his district, like because I was building a house out in Leavittsville. He goes, oh, he said, this is the kind of politician he was. He said you're going to need to find a new church, and he actually recommended a church for me out there because just being the politically astute guy he
Sure.
was, and I think his daughter ended up like showing up at that church as well. I've lost track of her because I'm in Texas now, but yeah, Frank Frank was a great guy and he had a good family.
Yeah, and his best friend in Congress was a Democrat. He was about as conservative as you could get in some ways, not in all ways, but in some ways he was very conservative. Best friend across the aisle was a Democrat. I don't think you see that very often now. I will also say one of the best things, most wonderful things that happened to me was getting out of politics when I did. I got out around 2010, maybe a little before then, and it was already changing. It was already becoming a much more negative place, but nothing compared to where it is today. I mean, today, the way campaigns are, it's totally different than I recall.
I think we're on the cusp of some change. I do. I hope. I hope because it's just we're at the point now where people don't even trust the elections. Like
Yeah,
I
that's a
don't know
huge
what the
problem.
percentage is now, but it's it's a growing percentage of people that don't believe our elections are legit, and so that's a problem.
That's a huge problem. I mean, that could be one of the biggest problems. If you don't trust the election results unless your side wins, then that could lead to huge issues, down the road. I mean, we think we've seen huge issues already, and we have in some ways, but it could get a lot worse.
So if we start to return to like a normal thing, like what we're talking about here, could I get reinterested? Yeah, I could. But it's not going to be the politics of today. It's going to be a new type of politics where we're not like blowing each other up and like I mean they're talking about assassinating candidates and like imprisoning candidates. I mean this is crazy talk, right? This is third world nonsense.
Well, on a more happy note, this has been an awesome hour that we've spent together, and I've learned a lot about you. I feel like I've learned a lot about business here from your experience, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to benefit from this. Can you tell us where can people buy your book?
So on Amazon or Barnes and Noble, there's other places, but those are the two big ones. It's How to Live the Abundant Life, and it's really it's it's not about this is not about getting rich. It's not about financial blessings. Yeah, that's part of it, but it's a small part of it. It's really the abundance of relationships, and it's taking an approach to life and business that's not consistent with human nature. It's doing the opposite of what comes natural. It's give to get. You want to be first to be last and servant of all. Kind of some of the stuff we've been talking about. It's really having an abundance um, in all aspects of life. And so I think if you want to turn over a new leaf for 2024, I encourage you. You can either buy if you like an old fashioned book, order the book. It's $12.95, or there's a 99 while the deal's out there. It's a 99-cent Kindle version of it where you can download the app and you just get a free Kindle app and you can read the book. And we're doing that to juice up sales, to get it out there. It's a positive message, and to get some reviews. So if
Cool.
you buy it, review it, please.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading it and happy to leave a review once I'm done.
Thanks, Will. I appreciate it more than you know.
Well, thanks for being on the show. This has been a great hour.
Thanks, Will.